Welcome to 1 Minute to Midnight. I'm Wilfred Cunningham. In the UK, the long-awaited Iraq, or Chilcot Inquiry, first announced on the 15th of June 2009 by then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, was published on the 6th of July 2016. The inquiry was tasked with reviewing the UK's involvement in the 2003 invasion of Iraq and subsequent war. While some had expected the report to be a whitewash, it was instead very clear in its findings, stopping short only of calling the Iraq War illegal. In 2002, Iraq came under immense pressure from the United States and its allies, most notably the UK, who accused it of building up stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, including illegal chemical and biological weapons, and of seeking uranium from African nations for an alleged nuclear weapons program. On the 8th of November that year, the UN Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 1441, the 17th resolution of its kind, this time aimed at giving Iraq a final opportunity to comply with its disarmament obligations. On the 13th of November, Iraq accepted the resolution, and weapons inspectors began to arrive in the country. In the months after this, Iraq cooperated with the weapons inspectors to varying degrees, and the US continued to exert pressure on Iraq and prepared for war with the pretext that Iraq was not cooperating, harboured weapons of mass destruction, and could use or launch those weapons on countries as far away as the UK with 45 minutes warning. Protests across the globe that demanded peaceful solutions saw enormous turnouts, and despite Iraq destroying some of its larger-than-allowed battlefield missiles, the US began bombing Iraqi artillery on the 19th of March 2003, before beginning an invasion the following day, without declaring war. Even before going to war, many in the US and UK, and in other countries, expressed doubts that the real motivation for war was belief that Iraq had WMDs, with many speculating that the invasion was intended to seize access of Iraq's oil production facilities, or that George W. Bush, President of the United States, specifically invaded to capture or kill Iraqi dictator President Saddam Hussein, because of resentment held of Hussein surviving a previous conflict between Iraq and the US in 1991, when Bush's father, George H.W. Bush, was the president. The failure of coalition forces to find weapons of mass destruction, and the death of David Kelly, a scientist with knowledge of biological weapons, and one of the weapons inspectors sent to Iraq by the UN, made an already divisive war more unpopular. An inquiry into Kelly's death, which occurred on the 17th of July 2003, 2 days after a select committee questioned him about leaking his concerns over a dossier compiled by the Joint Intelligence Committee, found that he had committed suicide. However, that remains an issue of professional contention between pathologists, and is arguably a significant cause of public distrust surrounding the UK government, then led by Tony Blair, and the Iraq War. Perhaps these things, and the growth of popular opinion against the war, which was increasingly thought to be unsuccessful in its stated objectives of making Iraq safe and democratic, and was certainly unsuccessful in proving an alleged link between the Hussein government and Al-Qaeda, led to Tony Blair's successor, Gordon Brown, announcing the Chilcot Inquiry, named after its chairman, John Chilcot, a former civil servant. More than 7 years after the announcement, Iraq is still a theatre of war, albeit with differently named belligerents. Chilcot's report, which examines the UK's role only, has been called damning by the BBC. It states, "When the UK sought a further Security Council resolution in March 2003, the majority of the Council's members were not persuaded that the inspection process, and the diplomatic efforts surrounding it, had reached the end of the road. They did not agree that the time had come to terminate inspections and resort to force. The UK went to war without the explicit authorization which it had sought from the Security Council." The report then explicitly states that diplomatic options had not been exhausted and military options were not yet the last resort. On the legality of military intervention, the report states, "The inquiry has reviewed the debate that took place within the government and how it reached its decision. The circumstances in which it was ultimately decided that there was a legal basis for UK participation were far from satisfactory. If the matter had been left to the Security Council to decide, military action might have been postponed and, possibly, avoided. The UK's actions undermined the authority of the Security Council." Counter to Blair's own statements, the report also found that the assessed intelligence had not established beyond doubt that Saddam Hussein had continued to produce chemical and biological weapons, and that after invasion, failure to find WMDs led to challenges to the credibility of both the government and the intelligence community. They also found that, on the 10th of February 2003, the JIC, Joint Intelligence Committee, judged that Al-Qaeda would not carry out attacks under Iraqi direction, and that while terrorists were in Iraq, they were not cooperating with the Iraqi government. Again, the report found that again before the war, the JIC also judged that Saddam's capability to conduct effective terrorist attacks was very limited. Iraq's terrorism capability was inadequate to carry out chemical or biological attacks beyond individual assassination attempts using poisons. The report also found there were some serious equipment shortfalls when conflict began. After the invasion overthrew the Hussein government, from early June 2003 and throughout the summer, there were signs that security in both Baghdad and the south was deteriorating. Yet the UK government continued to draw down troops despite a growth in insurgent actions, and the security situation remained in a state of flux for the following years because, among other factors, the UK was unwilling to commit significant amounts of additional troops. The report states that the UK's plan to hand control of areas to Iraqi forces were based on high-risk assumptions about the capability of the Iraqi security forces to take the lead for security, and undermined by military activity in Afghanistan, which put a serious strain on the UK military. The inquiry examined actions surrounding Iraq up until 2009, when it began, and stated, "The Iraq of 2009 certainly did not meet the UK's objectives as described in January 2003. It fell far short of strategic success." Perhaps mentioned most by the report, and scrutinised most closely in its wake, is Tony Blair, who was revealed to have spoken to then President of the United States, George W. Bush, about Iraq and military action, far before publicly coming to the conclusion that military intervention was viable. In this memo from the 28th of July 2002, released at the same time as the Chilcot report, Blair tells Bush, "I will be with you whatever." Blair has had access to the report before it was made public to prepare a reaction, and on the day it was released, held a 2-hour press conference.
For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe. Only 2 things I cannot say. It's claimed by some that by removing Saddam we caused the terrorism today in the Middle East and that it would have been better to have left him in power. I profoundly disagree.
Following the release of the report, Prime Minister David Cameron said that lessons must be learnt, and opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn apologised on behalf of the Labour Party, Blair's party, about the decision to go to war. Perhaps more significantly than either of them are comments from John Prescott, who was the Deputy Prime Minister at the time of the invasion. On the 10th of July, he wrote in the Sunday Mirror that he now agreed with the UN Secretary Kofi Annan that the war was illegal, and apologised for his part in it. Now, a group of MPs from several parties are calling for a vote to decide whether Blair is guilty of contempt of Parliament because of his handling of the presentation of facts in the lead-up to the invasion. No longer an MP himself, it seems unclear as to what being found in contempt of Parliament would mean for Blair. If you'd like to read the report yourself, the link is in the description below. At 2.6 million words, it should keep you in reading material for quite a while. So, until next time, goodbye, and try to remain calm.